Hi, it's Todd of Todd's Workshop here with Toby Capwell, Dr. Toby Capwell at the Wallace Collection. And here we're just following up with another film looking at the wonderfully lovely A479 German longsword from the Wallace Collection. So again, I've been very fortunate that Toby's allowed me to lay the two swords side by side, my reproduction and the original. And really, we're just going to have a chat about it. So would you like to start, Toby?
Yeah, this is turning into a bit of a regular thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is different than the previous project, where you were taking essentially a pristine original sword and making a copy. And this is something a bit different, because this is not a pristine sword. This is a composite, probably put together in the 19th century. Now, it is very attractive, and whoever put it together in Paris circa 1850 or 60 had that in mind. They thought, okay, I have a good blade, I have some odds and ends, I need to put together an attractive sword that'll look nice on someone's wall. They are not thinking about fighting with this sword.
Yeah.
And if you look closely, you've got a really, really nice blade, a hilt that doesn't really fit it, and never did, and a pommel that is of a slightly different style and period, too small for the blade, coming from something else again. So it's interesting now that you're in a position of saying, okay, let's make this sword as it should have been if it was really being made that way. You can't just make this as it is.
No, I mean, there's a couple of points I'd like to ask, actually, which I never did ask. Yes, it's a composite piece, so put together sometime in the 19th century, and the blade never worked with the sword. And actually, certainly there's a couple, which have, at least one that's gone through Hermann Historica, and another one which I've seen, which have a narrow blade, maybe 50 mil. I think this is, from memory, this is 77 mil wide.
It's pretty beefy.
And the ones I've seen, which are very similar, are about 50 mil. Obviously, this is a very unusual blade. What do you think it came off in the first place? Because I don't actually, I can't think.
Yeah, I mean, there are big bladed long swords of the 15th and early 16th centuries, which are again prioritizing a cutting form of fighting on the battlefield rather than the more narrow bladed, dueling longsword as such. And even back until the 14th century, you find some arming swords and some war swords that have quite big blades, and yet that still have a decent taper on them. So this is a pretty old blade typology, really.
Gut reaction on when that blade's from?
Well, I'm tempted to think it's earlier rather than later. I'm tempted to think it's earlier than the 16th century. It's very, very difficult to be sure, but that's what one's gut feeling says, considering what in the 16th century people are increasingly wanting for warfare. Grossmessers and S-stalks, and they're still using arming swords, but they're narrower, they're finely pointed. They're getting a lot more specialized, and this is a blade that gives you a good sense of being all-rounded. It cuts well, it thrusts well, it's an all-purpose fighting sword for war, which seems like a 15th century thing at least, if not earlier.
Almost a scrapping blade rather than...
Yeah, the one that can... It's like in the first half of the 15th century, when you often see war swords or long swords being actually replacing the arming sword on the knight's hip. He wants a bigger sword as his most basic sidearm. But it can't be too big if you're wearing it that way. It's got to be, still being able to serve the arming sword function. And this is a great blade for that. So it's it could be middle of the 15th century. It could even be a bit earlier. It does have a nice little fleur-de-lis mark on there that I haven't pursued.
You think you get a result out of that, out of interest?
I have no idea. There's so many objects in this collection that would reward more directed, focused research projects. But you know, many of these objects have simply had general cataloging attention. That's periodically been revised, but beyond cataloging, there's a more intensive level of research that'll really chase stuff like that down.
But you haven't got a spare 6 months for every object in the collection.
I've got about 500 years worth of research to do here, so I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. But there's so many projects demanding attention. But I think the blade of this sword is by far the most exciting part of it, and I think this project is a nice chance to say, okay, how should a blade like this really be balanced? For example, how should it really heft in the hand? I mean, we've got to be a little bit careful because the
grip is
the wrapping is disintegrating, but as it is now with a kind of small pommel from something else, it's really heavy towards the point. And with a big cutting blade like that, that's not totally a bad thing, but it's going a bit too far. That pommel just isn't quite big enough. Maybe the grip isn't quite long enough. I think, have you made your grip slightly longer?
It should be about the same size. I think,
but the pommel's bigger.
The pommel's a bit bigger. That was not actually my intention. But I think it was, as we talked about last time, that you get that parallax error, that disparity between photographs. And I can't remember on this one, but the last time when we looked at the A479, I was explaining to you that I had a tracing of it, I had your photographs of it and my photographs of it. And whenever you scaled it, all three gave different numbers. So that might be a little bit of an artifact here as well. But yeah, it's, sorry. For me, that it's got blade presence, and it's going to. I mean, the blade is it's about 10 millimeters thick at the hilt. It's got blade presence, but it feels pretty good.
I think it feels better than the original. I think it's got that little bit more balance. It's just because it is a thrusting sword as well. You do need to be able to do that. It brings the weight just down a little bit, and this is a sword that was made to be like this. And this isn't. I mean, this is a nice way of showing what this blade is meant to feel like. And maybe it originally would have had an earlier style hilt, but then again, there's lots and lots of evidence for good old blades turning up much later. And there's no reason why a 15th century blade couldn't have been remounted in the 16th century if it suited the individual they liked. This, I mean, I can see someone liking this. This is a perfectly good sword.
It's what you like,
I like the bigger pommel. I think it looks better, as well as feeling better, as well as balancing the blade better. I like seeing the hilt actually fit the blade. I mean, this is a nice example of how a reconstruction can contribute something. You pick that sword up and you go, oh, this is interesting, but that rattly hilt is really bothering me, and I want to feel a solid,
positive
sword. And it's nice to be able to illustrate that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well because I should have read the stats on that before I came. I've forgotten now. But it's either 10 or 30 grams overweight to this one.
Right. And that's in the pommel, huh?
One would think it was in the pommel.
The guard's a bit chunkier too, isn't it? A wee bit. In the middle, maybe? Seems like it's slightly more maybe?
Yes, but not a great deal. Not a great deal. So, I mean, if we can compare those to camera, I would say one is about 10 millimeters and the other about 11 millimeters. So there's not a great deal in it. There's not a great deal in it. Again, it's what we were talking about before. I mean, it is not an exact copy. It is a very similar to, I think it's fair to say. But it was interesting in that this one, when you come up close to it, it's rough. It's rough as you like. And particularly actually on the other side, if I remember rightly, it's so crudely done. So crudely done. And it almost makes you wonder if it was sort of like hurried through the workshop because he had to go and have a fight the next day or something like that. And that was an interesting thing for me because, of course, I wanted to capture the spirit of something. So actually, if I'd got my verniers out and I'd made that completely symmetrical and it was just super, super precise, you start to get the sterility of something rather than the life of it. And so it was a real fudge between, I couldn't sell that, nobody would want that, not in this day and age. But equally, I've not been super precise about it either, because it needs that. For me, I think it needs that.
It's to be an organic object. And who knows how many of these he was making.
Yeah.
Like some of the workmanship on the hilt, especially this bar, is very much evocative of German hunting swords of the early 16th century. And swords that have other functional contexts beyond pure warfare. And if this is a hilt maker who is in the business of making lots of things to a lower quality, that makes sense.
Yeah.
This is the slightly higher end version of that, really.
Yeah, perhaps. Now, interestingly as well, with the cord grip, it's not something I've actually specifically looked for. So we've got a waxed cord there which has been bound around, and interestingly not glued to the core. But I can't think of other examples of that. It's just nothing springs to mind, that's all.
My assumption is that this is supposed to have a leather cover over the binding.
Right.
And it's lost that, and then the binding started to unravel. But I don't expect to see a binding like that by itself.
No.
But if you look for it, you might very well start finding it, and people can tell me I'm wrong. Absolutely, I'd like to know about it.
Well, yeah, that's ever the way with this, isn't it? You find out new things by throwing it up on the.
It's just so hard to be sure of the date and authenticity of something like a grip. There's so many points when a grip could have been restored, replaced, messed with. We have very few authentic grips in this collection, and indeed that's true of pretty much any collection. This looks fine to me. It just looks like there's something missing. The outer covering, whether it's leather or whatever.
I mean, as a maker, I would have had an expectation that the cord would be glued to the grip.
Right.
Simply because it's going to get covered over anyway. You're never going to see it, and it's there for a structural purpose. So actually, you're going to get more structural purpose by gluing it. So it's a slightly confusing element for me. But then going back to the wide blade, the finger ring is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because again, the assumption would be that you put your finger through it, but you can't. And this was a debate. I had a commission for a series of these from 3 different gentlemen. And this one actually has been loaned. You happy for me to say no? This one has been loaned by Julian Massange, who's a friend and customer of many years now. But we had a debate at the beginning of whether the blade on this would be narrow, as in sort of 50 odd mil. And so basically, should I make a recreation that modelled what it should have been, not what the pastiche, the composite was? I think there was a few things. One, I think universally we all just love the look of this, and it's an iconic piece as it is.
I mean, it's no fun without that blade.
No, it's not. And so I was going to keep one of these swords for myself, which of course I never did. The cobbler in his shoes. And there was also a debate whether I should actually hollow out the blade there, which you very occasionally see.
Yeah, like on Alexandria.
And again, I think it was universal acclamation was don't do it. I don't know. It's one of those things, but
yeah, as well as it being too small, the present blade is also sharp there.
Yes,
which is another discouragement for putting your finger in there, even if it did fit. I mean, it's again a factor of it being a composite weapon with parts that aren't originally intended to be together. But I mean, if I was going to go off and try to find out more about this and try and build up a sense of how often do finger rings like that seem functional, and how much evidence is there for ones that don't work like this one? I mean, if you started to find a lot of these that clearly were non-functional, I mean, I don't think that's that surprising. I mean, if you looked at this sword, you know, you could explain this by just saying, look, we need a support for the counterguard. The counterguard's what's important, and we need it at an angle, so we're going to put a little bar up there to start it off. Well, and it doesn't need to be a finger ring at all, really.
Well, I think you're right for two reasons. And the first one is actually that if you reduce that blade by, what would it be, about 11 millimeters on each side, would get you into the right department? Yeah, about 10 to 11 millimeters on each side to give you the sort of the expected longsword blade width. It still doesn't really leave enough room comfortably for a finger. So that, I'd question it. But what it also does is it leaves a whopping great gap between the finger ring and the sword. Perfect for a blade to slide up and take your finger that's supposed to be protected.
Right. It's
so
not even doing the job.
It's not even doing the job that it's pretending to be doing if you put the right blade on it. So my suspicion actually all along is it's exactly as you said, it's just a flying support, it's a flying buttress for the counterguard.
And in that way, it's very elegant, and it places the counterguard exactly where you want it, in line with your thumb, depending on how you're holding the thing, obviously. No, I think it all works out.
But no, it was a lovely and I must say very challenging piece to make. The blade was a bitch, you know, it really was. And actually,
all this hollow grinding.
Yeah, and I made 3 of these blades in one go, and you know, it's learning for me. Every time you make a new piece, you learn new ways. And I tackled it in 3 different ways, and got 3 slightly different results. So this one, in fact, is probably truest to the original in that the hollow ground goes basically all the way barring the last inch of the blade.
Yeah, you can really see it fading out at the point, which is really nice. Nice feature.
Yeah, but again, it's a very robust blade because you get a hollow there that almost rises again at the edge, and you can see it
up the edges.
Yeah, you can see it particularly at the hilt here, and then it comes around to an apple seed at the edge. So, I mean, it's certainly a sword that's going to stand up to beating things. So you can see here that it dips in and then it actually widens again. It thickens there. I don't know if you can pick up the reflections. And then it's the same again. Or I tried to replicate it the same again on the reproduction. So, but yeah, no, it was a great piece to make. There's so many great pieces in the Wallace collection, really.
Let's keep going.
Well, I've got my eye on that Langmesser with the snake on the hilt. So that will come one day. But yeah, no, it's a good thing. There's Henry VIII sabre from the Royal Armouries, where the whole hilt is like a snake. And I've done that a couple of times in the past, and I think next time I do that, I'll contact the Royal Armouries and see if I could do a similar thing, because that's wonderful. But no, it is. Is it my favourite sword of all time? I think actually probably the 489, the Swiss sabre that you have here, is probably number 1, and this is probably number 2, I think.
Wow.
But I've been in it.
No, it's very beautiful.
Yeah. Oh well. Thank you very much.
No, thanks for bringing it in.
No, it's always a privilege. It's always slightly depressing because you see the bits you could have done better or different, but.
Just make a note of that.
Yeah.
It'll come back again.
It'll come back again. Well, I have another one to do actually, and I might this time make another one and keep that for myself. But what I said about the third one of these when I did it was I was going to make it and then just immediately before I even had a chance to think about it, whack a cold chisel into the edge so that it becomes unsellable. You know, because in that way it's the only way I'll ever get to keep one. And so next time I might actually do that. But somebody put me to the post. But no, I did a lovely scabbard for it as well, which I throw up on for Nathan Robinson at My Armoury, which is just a fantastic site, myarmoury.com. And I did a scabbard for his, which was very Landsknechty, so it had like really heavy ribbing on it, and it was inspired by a piece here actually. So it was like, you know, a massive locket on the scabbard and a you know, just like the way the Landsknechts did, just like completely over the top.
It's really nice to imagine that sword in that context, actually. Yeah.
So yeah, that was a nice thing to do as well, and yeah, so
All
that was
right.
good. Well, Toby, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So that's Dr. Toby Capwell at the Wallace Collection and Todd of Todd's workshop, discussing the wonderful yet slightly questionable origins of the A479 at the Wallace Collection. So it's a German longsword, early 16th century, sort of 1520, 1530-ish, something like that, or supposed to be, or bits of it,
Trying to be.
or bits of it are, or who knows. Whatever way you look at it, it's just a beautifully iconic, proper fighting sword, really. Yeah, beautiful, love it. Thank you very much, Toby. Cheers. So this is the very wonderful A697 that I've been talking about with Toby that I haven't done a reproduction of yet, but one day its day will come. So it's a German hunting sword, around about 1510 by the look of it. 38 inch blade maybe. Yeah, beautiful. I just love the little snake that goes up the middle of the grip. So one day, A697, I will come visit.